Catus, Maximus here. This is just a quick review of these GearWrench mid-length 1/4 inch drive chrome sockets. These are 6-point. Surprisingly enough, they were pretty cheap. Whenever I've tried to search for like 1/4 inch impact sockets, 1/4 inch, in this case, mid-length sockets, it always appears that GearWrench is the lowest price, reasonable quality brand. I haven't had the greatest personal luck with GearWrenches or with GearWrench tools, but their sockets seem to be generally okay. I know a lot of people think they're great, but they are pretty expensive when they're just like on a retail store shelf for some reason. But they're part of the Apex Tool Group, one of the world's largest tool manufacturers. So there's tons of stock that shows up online, and these are $32 shipped to my door. Interestingly enough, all that extra stock translates into varying prices. This is a 13-piece set, 4mm through 15 with the 5.5, no 4.5 or 6.3. And so 13-piece set was $32 shipped, yet the 10-piece fractional standard set was $40. It's significantly more expensive just due to lower sales. You know, considering it has less sockets, it's almost 30% more expensive than the metric one. So definitely for $32, these aren't too bad. They are mid-length. They are roll stamped, although I will say that the roll stamping is pretty light. They call it hard stamping, but that's just a roll stamp where they have a metal piece that has all the lettering on it, and so what happens is it draws across just like this and rolls the stamp onto the socket. So they are roll stamped. They are advertised as mid-length sockets right here, although I would say that they're on the kind of the shorter end of mid-length. To do a little comparison here, and I was doing some measuring, so some manufacturers' socket heights vary a little bit, but for general purpose, like on my Mastercraft and Power Build, etc., on 1/4 inch drive chrome, it would be 1 inch tall for the short well and 2 inches tall for the deep well. So I'd expect these to be, initially I was expecting them to be 1.5 inches. They're actually 1.25 inches tall. So they are on the shorter end of the mid-length sockets if we compare here to these Carlisles. And so I thought, that's just fine. The big deal about getting these sockets is because there's been oftentimes, particularly with Japanese car, timing belt covers, that type of stuff, where they have a zillion bolts and you only have like that much space to work in. And the bolts are in like holes that are varying depths. So you're like switching between deep well, short well. In many cases, it would have been really nice just to have something a little bit longer than a short well. And that was always the impetus for me to say, and we have an SK here, to get these universal sockets. One, they're a lot shorter than a socket with a universal joint on it. But the second reason is that they kind of gave you that option there where a universal socket's kind of like having a mid-length socket. But of course, it flexes around. There are many situations where you don't want that. To do another comparison, some of these auto parts stores like O'Reilly's have, they're selling these, they don't sell mid-well sockets. They just sell like these 10mm, service socket sets that are all varying 10 millimeters. These are 1 3/8, and maybe I think the GearWrench should have been a little bit longer, like these Power Torques, but of course, couldn't find a set of those. Just on a side note, O'Reilly's does have these short little 5/8 sockets. So I should mention everything else is, pretty nice. The walls are just a little bit thicker than the Carlisles. So just by like 0.005 of an inch, everything's fluted. The chrome plating's pretty good. Maybe a little didn't get done so well in the bottom of the socket, but they're okay. Nice little undercuts for the detents, so they do hold on to the ratchet nice and securely. So really overall not too bad. And I am glad that at least they are mechanically roll stamping rather than laser etching. And I should do an example. If something's going to be laser etched or socket, this would be proper, like this SK, where we've got laser etching in 3 different positions, as well as, of course, having a roll stamp. That's how you might properly label a socket. And it is nice. Rarely would you use 1/4 inch on a 15mm. I did want to point this one out just because the walls of the socket are actually surprisingly thick, but of course it's 1/4 inch drive. You'd break that drive well before you ever broke that socket. And, the plastic socket holders that GearWrench has been using for a while, which seems to work out okay. The real big issue I read about the plastic ones is the one that they kind of wear, the detents and stuff kind of wear out. And then 2 versus the metal ones, if it's really cold and you drop the socket strip, there's been issues with those breaking, which is always a special situation. But if we line these all up here, you can get those GM Power Torque Super Shorts. Then we have a standard length here. And let me go ahead and get all this together here. And so that would be kind of how it would look if you had those 4 socket sets. And that's kind of the whole point, is you can just get a socket that's just the right length, and it's not, you know, a universal. And what I'm trying to say is that they're rigid, so you have kind of a normal operation, particularly if you want to use a flex head ratchet. It's really difficult to use a flex on a universal socket. So they could potentially save some time and hassle with you having to dig around with other tools, particularly in tight spaces. And that's why I'm really after like the mid-lengths and 1/4 inch, at least to start off with, and then maybe, you know, get into 3/8, is because as you work with 3/8 or 1/2 inch drive, when you're working with larger fasteners, it seems that there's just in many situations they're set up where a mid-length socket wouldn't make the difference. But whenever you're working with the smaller fasteners in the 1/4 inch size, especially under dashes and all that automotive interiors, oftentimes you just need just the right length socket. And so the midwells, at least from GearWrench, I think is a good option to fill out a set, especially because they are really reasonably priced. Like I said, $32 shipped, so don't really think you can find a better deal on a name brand tool. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.